The Untold History of Canada, Indigenous Resilience and the Path to Reconciliation. Prologue, The Land Remembers. We were never discovered. We were always here. For more than 15,000 years, this vast land has carried the heartbeat of indigenous peoples, laughter echoing through ancient forests, songs rising with the smoke of sacred fires, dreams woven into the soil beneath endless skies. Long before borders and flags, there were nations with deep laws, vast trade routes, thriving cities, and spiritual bonds no empire could erase. Today we call this place Canada, but its soul was shaped by the tears, triumphs, and unbreakable spirit of those who came first. This is not simply the history of a country. It is the raw story of survival through loss, of truth rising from silence, and of resilience stronger than any darkness. The land remembers every footstep, every prayer, every wound. And we are still here, because the land chose us to carry its story forward. Ancient nations, life before contact. As glaciers retreated, the first peoples arrived on this land, 15,000 years ago, or far earlier, as oral histories whisper with certainty. They did not merely survive, they flourished. Along the Pacific coast, the Haida and Nuu-chah-nulth carved towering totem poles that spoke to the sky, while potlatch ceremonies overflowed with generosity that bound generations together. Across the prairies, Cree, Blackfoot, and Sioux nations lived in rhythm with vast bison herds, following sacred cycles of land and life. In the eastern woodlands, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy shaped the great law of peace, a democratic vision that would one day echo across the world. In the Arctic, the Inuit mastered ice and stars with breathtaking ingenuity, thriving where few others could survive. These were not primitive wanderers. They were astronomers who mapped the heavens, engineers who built in harmony with nature, diplomats who forged alliances across vast distances, and artists whose work still stirs the soul. Over 500 nations, each with its own language and governance rooted in respect for the land. Trade networks stretched farther than Rome's roads, carrying goods from distant southlands to the Great Lakes. Some built cities of tens of thousands while Europe was ravaged by plague. This was a world alive with knowledge, culture, and human brilliance. First encounters, wonder and warning. Around the year 1000, Norse sailors briefly touched Newfoundland's shores, then vanished like a dream. 5 centuries later, everything changed. In 1497, John Cabot claimed a land that was never empty. In 1534, Jacques Cartier raised a cross along the St. Lawrence, met with cautious curiosity by indigenous peoples whose eyes carried both welcome and warning. At first, trade brought wonder, iron tools exchanged for furs, trust tentatively extended across cultures. But unseen horrors followed. Smallpox and measles tore through communities with merciless speed, silencing villages that once rang with laughter. Some nations lost nearly all their people. And yet, even amid devastation, indigenous nations remained sovereign, guiding lost Europeans through wilderness they could not survive alone. What does it mean to discover a land already alive with millions of lives and sacred stories? Colonial shadows, New France and the fur trade. Samuel de Champlain's alliances with the Huron-Wendat and Algonquin were lifelines in fragile colonial beginnings. The fur trade surged, giving rise to the Voyageurs and the Métis Nation, children of indigenous women and European men who forged a new identity rooted in the land. But cooperation gave way to conflict as European demand for beaver pelts ignited the Beaver Wars, turning allies into enemies. Missionaries arrived bearing faith and promises, but often carried control instead. Some indigenous peoples adopted new beliefs, others protected ancient ceremonies. Britain's royal proclamation acknowledged indigenous land rights in theory, but betrayal soon followed, setting a pattern that would repeat for generations. Birth of a nation, confederation and expansion. Loyalists fleeing the American Revolution reshaped the land once more. During the War of 1812, indigenous warriors led by Tecumseh fought with extraordinary bravery to defend their homelands. Then came 1867, Confederation, celebrated by some as nationhood, experienced by others as loss. Expansion westward brought railways and settlers. Treaties were signed with promises of sharing, but elders later spoke of coercion and misunderstanding. The Indian Act of 1876 crushed indigenous autonomy, banning ceremonies and confining families to reserves. On the plains, the slaughter of bison starved entire nations, a deliberate act whose scars remain etched into memory. The darkest chapters, residential schools. From the 1880s until 1996, over 150,000 indigenous children were taken from their families and forced into residential schools. The goal was explicit, to erase identity. Children were beaten for speaking their languages, stripped of culture, subjected to abuse and neglect. Thousands never returned home. Unmarked graves still whisper their names. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission called it what it was, cultural genocide. And yet, even there, resistance lived. Songs whispered in the dark. Stories hidden under blankets. Identity carried in secret. Survivors emerged scarred but unbroken, carrying voices that now rise with strength. They tried to erase us, but we are still here. The 20th century, wars, growth, and awakening. Indigenous soldiers fought bravely in both world wars, earning honors abroad while denied rights at home. Afterward, immigration transformed Canada into a multicultural society. In 1982, the Constitution recognized Aboriginal and treaty rights, a long overdue truth and reconciliation, facing the past. In 2008, Canada formally apologized for residential schools. In 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission issued 94 calls to action. Progress is slow, but every orange shirt worn, every truth spoken, brings the country closer to healing. Reconciliation is not a moment, it is a lifelong journey. Epilogue, a hopeful future. Canada's future must honor those who cared for this land since time beyond memory. Today, Indigenous youth are reclaiming languages, protecting waters, shaping law, and leading climate action. Resilience is their inheritance, and their gift to the world. The land still remembers. Now, we must remember too. Reconciliation begins with truth, and grows through courageous acts of love.